Greetings and welcome to Community in the Crossfire, seeking civil dialogue in uncivil times. This recording is the first of a series of 5 panel discussions, the next one coming up on September 8th. What we'd love for you to do is to go to our Facebook page or go to our website to find more information, upcoming forums, but you'll also be able to do an anonymous evaluation of the presentation. You'll be able to watch the different recordings of this. There's one which was a Zoom recording and one from KLTV. And also on our website, civildialogue.com, you'll be able to post questions, make comments, and engage in discussion with other people who have watched, attended live or watched this presentation. So tonight you can see that our panel members are Ann Rivers, Dean Tacko, Jerry Cooper, and Jim Young. But on September 8th, the topic will be different and different panelists. Economic development and the environment on September 8th, 7:30 to 9. Again, in Loftman Lecture Hall on the LCC campus, HSB, Health Science Building 101. Please join us then. As you watch this tape, some of the audio is questionable. If you can't hear properly, then please turn on closed captions so that you can capture every word said by our wonderful panelists.
Okay. All right. I think it's time for us to begin. Good evening, and thank you for being here. This series we've called Community in the Crossfire, Civil Dialogue in Uncivil Times. It was organized by a group of local citizens from across the political spectrum in response to what a lot of us see as the increasingly bitter, acrimonious, even hateful tone that seems to have overtaken a lot of the political discourse, both in our nation and in our community. My name is Steve Warning. I'm a retired Cowlitz County Superior Court judge. I'll be the moderator of a series of 5 public forums. We're going to be discussing issues we think important to the health and well-being of the community. Tonight we're going to take a look at the state of political debate, political discourse, how we got to the unfortunate...
Recording in progress.
Glad to hear that. And what we should do about it. What kind of changes can we make? In the coming sessions, we're going to take a look at the tensions between growing our local economy and safeguarding the environment, how we want to address homelessness in the community, and some aspects of the ravages of drug abuse in this community. We don't expect, and our purpose really isn't to try and reach any sort of an agreement here on how to solve the problems. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is to expose us all to differing viewpoints, to demonstrate, we hope, that we can talk to each other respectfully, without insults or personal attacks that become part and parcel of our political rhetoric, but still have a spirited debate about views that we are passionate about. We're going to start each session with an overview of the particular issue, presented by a member of the Lower Columbia College faculty. After that, we'll introduce our guest speakers for the session and we'll start the discussion. At the end, we have a short period for a recap and to highlight some of the key points that have come up. And we intend to close by 9 p.m. Keeping a civil discourse is the responsibility not just of the people up here, but I think of everybody. And we ask you keep civil, whether you're part of the panel or in the audience. If you feel especially passionate about what's said or who's saying it, we ask that you respect our panelists and the rest of the audience and refrain from adding your comments. I hope I don't have to remind anyone. Good, civil, passionate debate and dialogue requires some understanding, I think, and some agreement to some basic ground rules that apply to all of us. And if you could flip, I think, 2 slides, we'll get to that. There we go. So no personal attacks. Active listening. Everybody tries to hear and understand what the other person is saying, even if you don't agree. Truthfulness. And it amazed me that the tone of political discourse in this country has gotten to the point where that one has to be mentioned. But it's important. Respect. I always said in court, everybody act like an adult. And everybody gets a chance to speak. We have a website. It is at civil, C-I-V-I-L, hyphen dialogue, dialog.com. There is a forum there where you can give us your comments and your feedback. We also have a Facebook page. I have no idea how that works, so I'll just tell you that it exists. So as we said, tonight's topic is civil discourse in uncivil times. To help frame the discussion, I want to introduce Alex Brame. Alex is a communication studies instructor at LC. He is the coach of the college's national champion fighting smelt debate team. I still think that's one of the finest team names I've ever heard. So Alex, to frame this, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Though this building is quite new, this stick mic was not built for people of my height, so I'll attempt to overcome that. If anyone's having a hard time hearing me, please just wave, make yourself known. I'll do my best to speak up or lean down or something. The first nationally televised presidential debate in the United States occurred in 1960. That was between candidates John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. There is no doubt that so much has changed in presidential politics in the 60 years since those Kennedy-Nixon debates, but one element has generally remained a constant: the handshake. According to Dr. Mitchell S. McKinney, a political communications scholar at the University of Missouri, the handshake telegraphs that we have a civil political process, that people expect certain things in terms of a level of decorum and civil demeanor among our leaders. We see in a handshake between two prospective leaders that there's a sense of common purpose and a shared mission that unifies parties. In the entire history of televised U.S. presidential debates, there have been 3 instances when candidates did not shake hands. All 3 of those instances occurred in the last 6 years. The members of our community who organized and planned this 5-part discussion series hold the position that we are living through particularly uncivil times. And while the lack of a handshake at a political debate may be primarily symbolic, it is indicative of the state of our current political climate. This topic hits particularly close to home in the work that I do, coaching Lower Columbia College's speech and debate team, the Fighting Smelt. In intercollegiate debate, students really only find success once they learn to listen actively, to respect their opponents, and to thoughtfully engage with multiple perspectives and arguments. This type of discourse is not easy, but in my view, it could not be more important. In tonight's conversation, we hope to kick off this series by exploring the concept of civility itself. Before we invite our amazing panelists up to the front of the room, I want to explore just a few questions. What is civility? What, if anything, has changed? Why do we need civility? And what is the path forward? So first, we're going to be using the word civility extensively this evening and throughout the series. We really do hope that you come back. So let's make sure that we have a shared understanding of what it is. According to the nonpartisan and nonprofit organization, the Institute for Civility in Government, civility is about more than just politeness, although politeness is a necessary first step. It is about disagreeing without disrespect, seeking common ground as a starting point for dialogue about differences, listening past one's preconceptions, and teaching others to do the same. Civility is the hard work of staying present, even with those with whom we have deep-rooted and fierce disagreements. I want to reiterate and highlight some things that I think are really important from that definition. Civility does not simply mean being nice, rolling over, and agreeing with someone else. It does require respect, active listening, and an honest attempt to find common ground. Civility as a concept is difficult to measure and quantify. So how do we know if civility is increasing or decreasing within our society? Well, a poll conducted by Georgetown University in February of this year reported that 70% of respondents feel civility in America has reached crisis levels. And registered voters view political polarization as one of the most pressing concerns facing our country. In light of that widespread sentiment, we should consider the question, what has changed? I don't have time in these brief remarks to discuss everything that has changed in our society since the founding of our nation, but I'll float two societal changes that seem particularly important to me. Undoubtedly, our panelists will have some additional ideas to add to the conversation. First, our media landscape has evolved dramatically over the past few decades. We don't have to go too far back in our history to find a time when every member of a community consumed more or less the same news. There were a few local TV news stations, there were maybe one or two local newspapers. Everyone was receiving fundamentally the same information. Now, with the advent of the internet and cable television, that landscape could not be more different. Depending on whether a person gets their news from MSNBC or Fox News, from the Daily Kos or Breitbart, from a newspaper or from social media, we are often operating with completely different sets of information than the folks that we are attempting to engage in dialogue with. Second, the way we socialize has evolved dramatically along with those changes in technology. In his book, Bowling Alone, social scientist Robert Putnam explored the decline of social capital in American public life. Even in the late 1990s, when Putnam was writing his book, it was clear that Americans were spending far less time in public spaces, places like bowling alleys, libraries, and city parks. When we aren't in physical spaces with members of our community, it logically follows that we aren't practicing having conversations with them. This trend has been turbocharged by the internet. With access to a computer or tablet, I no longer need to go to a bowling alley because I have access to the most sophisticated video games ever developed. I don't need to go to a library because all knowledge in the world is available digitally in my living room. And I might not visit a city park, even though, honestly, I probably should go outside a little more often. The amount of time that we spend on the internet leads us all to echo chambers. Communities where everyone holds similar beliefs and values, and those beliefs and values are perpetuated and reinforced. These structural changes in our society mean we are not practicing civility. Yet, civility remains critically important to a healthy society. The National Conference on State Legislatures states that incivility permeates every facet of life, from bullying to road rage to hostile work environments. In a very real sense, incivility costs us health and money. In contrast, civility is a precursor to effective public discourse. We live in a time when we face monumental challenges. Climate change, economic stagnation and inflation, homelessness, drug abuse, civil rights and racial justice, and the changing landscapes of education, healthcare, and immigration. The only way we can possibly overcome these challenges is together. And that means engaging in difficult conversations and practicing civility while we do. The final question that I had hoped to explore today was, what is the path forward? And frankly, I don't know. For my part, I'm going to keep practicing civil dialogue with the LCC speech and debate team, but I'm also particularly eager to hear the perspectives of our panelists tonight. I'm guessing we won't all agree about everything tonight, and frankly, that's the point. But we will all be enriched by engaging in a challenging, but civil, conversation. At a minimum, I hope that we will all be willing to shake each other's hands when all is said and done. With that, I want to invite Steve back up and get this party started.
Thank you. All right, first, I'll just start on one side and work my way across. Mr. Dean Tacko, former state senator, Democrat from the 19th district. You and Jim are going to share the mic over there. We're one microphone shy, so that we're trying to sort that out. Senator Ann Rivers, Republican from the 18th district. I think they were going to pass the mic back and forth, but your call. Right there's fine. Okay. And Jim Young, who is the Cowlitz County Democratic Party Chair, Vice Chair, pardon me. Jerry Cooper, who is the Cowlitz County Republican Party Deputy Chair, correct? Vice Chair, okay. And I apologize because now I'm going to have to sit over here and turn my back to everybody for the rest of this, but that's the only way we could sort this out. So first of all, thank you for being here and taking your time. Very much appreciated. I want to direct my first question to Senator Rivers and Mr. Tacko. You have both been known for a long time as people in Olympia and in the Senate who were very willing to work across the aisle, collaboratively with the other party. Is there still room in Olympia for the moderate, and can the moderate still get elected? Fire away.
It's on? Okay. Very interesting question. Can a moderate still get elected? Yes, but it's tough. I mean, we can see just in the last election, you know, there wasn't much in the way of moderates that got elected. So I think it's going to be tough. I don't think, and I'd like to get Ann's opinion on this. I don't think there's too many moderates left in the legislature, to be quite frank about it, on either the D or the R side in the House or the Senate. And so I'll just kind of leave it at there.
Okay.
I agree with what Dean said. When Dean was still in the Senate with me, we were in the roadkill caucus. That meant that we got run over by both sides. We were in the middle of the road getting run over by both sides. Here's what I'm seeing. The moderates don't have to fear the other party. The moderates have to fear their own party because they get a label and then they become unworthy of election. Even though the fact of the matter is they vote 95% of the time exactly the way the party would want them to. So I think that it's an issue that the elected officials recognize the value of collaboration, cooperation, and also compromise. But those are now the new C words. And our parties don't like those words. And so that makes us kind of a dying breed.
Is there still a place for moderates in our state legislature?
Look, all of the solutions come from the middle. The solutions that what we, and Dean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, what we shoot for is that people are 50% happy and 50% sad. They get what they need, but maybe not all of what they want. And so we do our level best to get that done. But when you have decisions that or propositions that come from either the fringes on either side, then you've got one group of people 100% sad. And that's not, in my humble opinion, good governance, because our oath of office is not that we represent only those with the same letter designation or the same gender or the same hair color or the same profession. It's that we uphold the laws in the Constitution of the United States and the laws in the Constitution of the state of Washington. And we represent all the people in our district, not just the ones who vote for us.
I think I can leave it on too.
Yeah, I agree with her. You know, before I left, there was 4 of us that I would say were in the 4 moderates in the Democratic caucus, and now there's only 1. And I think you can see that what happened in the last couple of legislatures this year and the last year. I think if you look at what passed and what didn't, it's pretty obvious that the effects of the four of us that were able to moderate some of our Democratic friends kind of went out the window. I hate to say that.
Let me turn to the two-party vice chairs, Mr. Young, Mr. Cooper. As Senator Rivers mentioned, it's commonly thought or commonly held that the political parties have moved away from the middle, more towards the edges. And certainly the rhetoric from candidates, from party leaders has gotten a lot more heated. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Why has it happened from your standpoint?
Well, it's interesting, as Ann was speaking, you know, the middle is defined by the edges. And so the middle is always dependent on where the extremists or the outliers exist. And that was interesting to me because, again, as we look in middles, the middle is different, or the moderates are different based on the different contexts, the different states, the different localities. And one thing that's interesting is locally, us as Republicans, we've struggled because, so just using that label as a Republican, a lot of things are inferred about what a Republican is, and a lot of that comes from the national stage. And I think the Democrats may suffer from that somewhat too. And that label is used to determine who we are. And so locally, something of interest that some of you may be aware of, a couple of years ago, our county Republican Party, we sat down and we drafted what we call core principles. What is a Calais County Republican? Nobody really knew. And so we put together these core principles. We've actually posted them on the front-facing window in our headquarters next to the Kelso Post Office. And we laid out the principles of who we are and what we believe. And I would invite you to come take a look and see if you believe that also. It's fascinating because we try to transcend these arguments and positions and issues that so often label us and almost cause us to be serve as anchors, cause our defeat and our failure. But anyway, that's some of the thoughts I have. Jim?
Well, clearly, I think things are more polarized today, and I think it's unfortunate that they are. As we heard in the introduction, I think there are a number of factors that have led to that. One of which is we as a society have become separated into more and more silos, sliced up, population kind of sliced up into more narrow groups of people who share an affinity for something. You know, and that's reflected, as we heard again in the introduction, through all the different cable TV channels and what you can get over streaming. And so people can seek out very specifically things that they identify with, but that's maybe only a fairly narrow slice of other people. Whereas back in the day of Walter Cronkite, right, everyone was getting their news from the same spot. Or as a nation, when there was the moon landing, or you know, the Winter Olympics, the Miracle on Ice, there were events that could still pull the country together, and there was kind of a shared sense of community. And I think over time that we've lost that. And I think also one of the reasons this is happening is partially a structural problem in how we frankly write the lines for our congressional districts and for our legislative districts. And the way that it's become more and more partisan and these districts have become more gerrymandered, what it's done is you've set up more safe seats on either side. So you've got more safe Republican seats, conservative seats, you've got more safe liberal seats, Democratic seats. And so therefore, to be nominated in the primary, you're appealing to your hardcore activists within your party, which tend to have the more extreme locked in positions on the spectrum. So I think one of the things we need to address as a culture in our politics is we need to figure out a way to draw the boundaries, to do our redistricting in a way that is nonpartisan or is bipartisan, and more competitive districts is going to be better for democracy, because people are going to need to moderate when you're in a district that is more narrowly divided. You have people on the right and the left, so people are going to have to be offering the voters solutions. So I actually think having a lot more competitive political districts is one of the things that we need to think about in this country.
And my goal is that I talk a lot less than any of you. So if please chime in at any point in time. You know, everybody kind of laments this level of political polarization. It's not the first time we've been in this position. In the 1960s, the rhetoric was pretty heated. We all remember or have seen, if you're not quite as old as some of us, the pictures of the Democratic National Convention. We had a civil war some time back. What makes this different? What makes this more lamentable than it's been in the past?
Well, let me just say, for one thing, this is different for me because I'm living it in 3D full color, where everything that happened before, history tends to sanitize our perspective. It makes it 2D, black and white, seemingly obvious outcome, but we're actually in the middle of this. So it makes it kind of exciting for us, at least for me. Another thought I'd like to just quickly add to that, I think the thing that is concerning to me is the glue that holds us together. The reason why we associate and are together, form a body politic, that's loosening in my mind. It's undergirded by fundamental principles. There's got to be something, we've mentioned it already on the panel, there's got to be something that draws us together that we can build upon. And that's really got to be the basis in my mind of our discussions, of our debate, our dialogue.
I would submit to you that during the 60s, it was, do you support the Vietnam War or do you not? And that was the seminal question and the litmus test, as it were. That's not the case today. What's really troubling to me about today is it's about people and about attacking people and about attacking their credibility and about providing no context, but providing a set of facts. To me, social media, where you can inflict 100% of the pain, but not have to see the pain on someone's face that you've inflicted. That is what is so, or bloggers who write things that they would say are the truth and yet can provide absolutely no substantiation. To me, I think that's what's very different about the 60s compared to now, is the impact that social media has had. And the way that it's almost like if it's on the internet or it's true, it must be true. And that I think is a really a frightening proposition, because anyone can say anything and it's perceived as truth. And how do you really know? So that, for my part, is the major difference between then and now.
I think for me, one of the key distinctions in how divisions were expressed politically back in maybe the 60s or the 70s, civil rights era, Vietnam War, and you touched upon this, is they tended to be very issue driven, right? I mean, they were about a very specific thing, an issue, and there were two sides or more to that issue, right? And so people could debate it, disagree about it, but at least it was a substance of an important issue in American life. And even though there was violence sometimes associated with that, I guess to me, I see the kind of violence that we saw during the civil rights era or during Vietnam War as being more of kind of the spontaneous. You'd had opposing sides at a rally, tempers would flare, you'd have some brawl. It was kind of in the heat of the moment, like, you know, that comes up in trials in court sometimes. Did someone act in the heat of the moment, or was it premeditated? Was it deliberate? Was it more cold-blooded? And that's one of the very disturbing differences, I think, about polarization today, because a lot of it, I would argue, is indeed premeditated. It's cold-blooded. It's people getting together and conspiring and planning ahead of time to take an action. It's not something that's happening in the moment. It's something that groups of people are actively getting together and planning to do. And that's very different. And I think that's dangerous. And you know, it's hard to say exactly how to address that, but to me, that's one of the real differences. And also the other point is, and I think you touched on this too, is that today I think people separate any issues just find themselves almost from the get-go in different camps or in different tribes. So it's conservative versus liberal, Democrat versus Republican, rich versus poor, you know, white versus non-white. There's almost just these camps that we're in from the get-go that don't really have anything to do with a specific issue, but it's more of this identity, the politics being kind of interwoven with people's identity. And that gets harder to separate and to kind of tease out then.
Well, the previous people have alluded to what I think one of the biggest problems we have is, and that's the internet and social media. You know, I was a late teenager, early 20s during the Vietnam War, and when Bobby Kennedy was killed and Martin Luther King, and I saw all that stuff. But the difference then to now is, you know, when we saw the kids shot at Kent State, everybody saw it. It was the truth. Kids were shot at Sandy Hook. Oh, we can watch some other guy on another network that tells us that really didn't happen. That's what the big difference is. It's the media, if you even really want to call that media. You know, it's if you got something you want to believe, whether it's, you know, the Holocaust didn't happen or the Earth is flat, you'll find somebody that'll verify that for you. That's the difference. When, you know, when I was a teenager in my early 20s or whatever, and there was no internet, you know, we, as you said, we got our news from what I call legitimate news sources. They were Associated Press, it was Time Magazine, it was Wall Street Journal. They had real reporters that went out and dug and gave you a report that was, as far as I'm concerned, was true. There was no alternative fact or alternative truth. And I think that's what's really driving all of this.
Anybody else on that? I want to kind of follow up on that. So as Alex had mentioned, depending on what you want, you can get a news feed that's tailored to your particular views, and you don't have to get bothered by something that might cause you to question those views. We've got, as was mentioned, silos in social media. My favorite definition I've heard so far for Twitter is a megaphone for stupidity. We have a First Amendment. So do we need to figure out a way to put controls on social media? Are there ways to put controls on social media in this country? Or is it something we're just going to have to suffer with?
Well, it's interesting as I look around the room, we're kind of the wrong generation, I think, to discuss some of this stuff. I don't do much social media because it seems to be a good place to find gotchas, but I don't know if I've ever experienced or found a respectful, well thought out, well presented dialogue or discourse of ideas, at least in sites I've looked at. So I don't know. I guess I would have to disqualify myself regarding internet and internet activity.
That may fit an awful lot of us in this room.
I'm going to be very squeamish about curtailing First Amendment rights in any form. I do think, however, that we have to, in ourselves, and as we raise our children, our grandchildren, we have to be very clear about critical thinking. And wait a minute, does this really pass the straight face test? So, you know, the other thing that the internet did, just something that Dean said made me think about it. There were fringe groups. There have always been fringe groups, always. Holocaust deniers is a perfect example. And until the internet, these people remained remote from one another. But the internet was a way that they could find one another and reinforce one another's thinking, whether, you know, it doesn't matter what the issue is. So you now have conglomerates of people, and they go to one another for confirmation bias confirmation. This is how I think. If you think this way, it must be the truth. And that, of course, these comments are not about one party or another. This is truly just about a statement about where we've gotten to as a society. But I think for my part, I'm really uncomfortable with sort of the idea of putting, because who knows truth? I mean, the president made a run at that and it didn't work out so well. So I think that when he started his, what was it called? Come on, you see, it was such a flash in the pan. I don't even remember the name of it.
Social,
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, we just have to, we have to start with our younger generations. We have to teach them how to think, not what to think, but how to think critically, so that when they see something, they know they can throw the BS flag.
The social media genie is definitely out of the bottle and it's not going back in. And I share your concerns about trying to do anything legislatively and how that affects First Amendment rights. I mean, it's a very thorny subject, how you can regulate the internet. And Congress is struggling with that and is going to continue struggling with that. And of course, you're going to have the Facebooks and the Googles and the Twitters, and they're going to be spending millions of dollars on the other side. And these are now our huge corporations. I mean, these are driving the economy. They have an incredible amount of power. So I think each of us can do what we can do as individuals. We can play our own little part. I think we can bring our own sense of accountability to social media. And just an example I'll give of that, if a friend or someone posts something on social media and it just looks a little squirrely to you, the source looks questionable, it's taking a little bit of extra time to do a little investment, personal investment in our democracy and our republic to say, wait a minute, I'm going to look into this and not just accept whether this is true or not, right? I'm going to go check some other sources. I'm going to check this out. And so the second part of that is, besides personal accountability, those of us who are leaders in whatever it might be, elected officials or within a political organization or within a school board or a coach on a team, whatever it may be, I think there's an obligation to call out, hold people accountable and that are friends, that are circulating information that is not correct on social media, and to not just let it go because, oh, they're a fellow progressive or they're a fellow Democrat. I think we need to make the effort individually to call out people on our own side. We need to enforce, as you were saying, now it's that incumbents and moderates are facing more attacks from people within their own party, right? So it's this need to kind of deal with issues within our own camps and have more accountability within our own camps. And we all need to be part of that effort, I think.
Well, to your first question, I don't think, as he said, the genie's out of the bottle. I don't think we're going to do anything about it. I don't know how you would. But one thing that popped up is, I thought about this being here quite a bit in the last week or so, and I jotted down a couple of keywords and things that I hoped would come up. And she already brought up the word, that one of the words that I think is really critical, and that's critical thinking. And we don't teach in schools critical thinking. And I've been reading some things about it over the last year. How do you critically think? You don't just, oh, well, that sounds pretty good. I agree with it. Sounds kind of crazy, but I heard it, so it must be true. And so there's two things that I think that our schools really need to do, is have courses on how do you critically think and how do you find the real truth. And maybe what you heard is true, but verify it. The other thing that is frustrating to me, having been in local government and state government for quite a few years, is we don't teach civics like we should. There is such a misunderstanding of how government works on the local, state, and federal level. It's just, I don't know if I should say it this way, but to me, it's just kind of mind-boggling how little our population understands how governments work on all levels. So many misconceptions, and those misconceptions lead into these conspiracies and these untruths and all this stuff. I would really like to see civics taught and government taught a lot more in our schools. And I think maybe we could solve a little bit of this problem.
And I don't want anybody to think you only get one bite of the apple. If there's something else you want to toss in on any of these subjects,
Well,
please
I
do.
disagree with Dean on that last point. I think civics, losing civics education within our schools has been a big mistake, and we are seeing its impact. I mean, I'd be curious how many graduating seniors from just doing a survey of seniors across the country could even name the 3 branches of government. I mean, that simple of a question when they get out of school. It just seems like we completely dropped the ball on that. So I agree. I think local school boards around the country need to prioritize reinserting civics as a high priority along with reading, writing, arithmetic.
One of the few bits of Latin that I still recall is cui bono, who benefits. Okay, I'm just going to take this off and hold it up there. Okay, I'll repeat that. So who benefits from this kind of polarization? If it wasn't working, it would die a natural death, you would think. So it's working for somebody. Who's it working for, and why on earth is it working for them?
Well, I think some of the companies I named before, I mean, it's working for Facebook, and it's working for Google, and it's working for Twitter. It's making lots of money because it's creating clicks and it's bringing eyeballs. And believe me, these companies have done the research on this, and they find things that provoke an emotional response, happy, sad, but particularly angry. Angry seems to provoke the response where people will stay on the internet the longest and they will interact with it the most, which is what these companies want. You stay on longer, you see more ads, you make more spontaneous decisions to go and buy something, you bring in the ad dollars. So, you know, they definitely benefit. And then I think also people on either side of the political spectrum on the extremes, they benefit. So whether it's people who host talk shows who are making multi-millions of dollars, who are on the far right or on the far left, and whether it be Tucker Carlson, whether it be Rachel Maddow, I mean, those kinds of folks as well benefit from this. So I think a lot of it is driven by, it's just kind of economics, it's profit.
I agree. This is an easy one.
I agree too. We have consensus.
What are we going to do about it? So when we were planning for this, the hope was that I'd ask like 3 questions and you guys would just start talking.
Wow.
So feel free to just dive in. Is there a bottom to this? Is there a point that we're not going to go beyond?
But, you know, back to your previous question, though, there is some others that benefit from it. Is you've got a platform where you can have the craziest product, whether it works or not, and you can go out there and sell that memory thing, or, you know, memory tablet or anything. You know, it's crazy. So there's a financial reason there that this thing is working, because you know, you just look at the crazy things that you can buy off the internet.
I think I bought some this week.
Well, I was going to say it's interesting. In 1856, Senator Charles Sumner called another unnamed senator a noisome, squat, nameless animal, unfit as a model for an American senator. A representative came over from the House of Representatives in the Senate chamber, and with his metal-tipped cane, beat Senator Sumner into unconsciousness. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas participated in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which are considered the most famous political one of the most famous political dialogues in our nation's history. And so I guess my point is the civility and the uncivility, or the lack of civility, I don't think is unique to our time period, that it's happened over history. And perhaps the conditions and the context are a little bit different. Of course, we have the internet, whatnot, but I think there's truths that basically transcend time and circumstance. What made the Lincoln-Douglas debate so different? And there's a couple things I'd suggest. Is number one, they were involved in what I call long-form communication. Dean mentioned, well, and did too, about critical thinking in our education. Another thing we don't emphasize is long-form communication, letter writing, essays, dialogue, discourse. Everything is 144 characters or less, or a sound bite. And again, that feeds into what Jim was mentioning too, regarding our circumstance and situation. But in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Abraham Lincoln and, well, both participants had plenty of time to express their position, as well as to counter the opposing argument. And it's interesting too, they tried to define their terms rather than using labels that are so often common in our society now. The other piece I guess I would bring out too is they grounded the debate in, again, what I refer to as fundamental principles that were shared in common, not only by them, but by their audience. So I think those are some keys as far as dialogue, I think, that are almost timeless, that might be something good for us also.
So I'm going to push back on you a little bit. I love the Lincoln-Douglas debate idea. And as someone who may have gotten in a little hot water for calling another senator a naughty name, I was grateful that no one came and beat me with a cane. But I feel like those were exceptions, those events. What we are experiencing today feels very daily to me. The my husband calls it bringing the bazooka to the checker match, right? Where you are not only going to win, you are going to decimate, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively, the person who's there to play checkers with you. And so I think that this win at any cost, we have to win at any cost, is really moving our ball backwards. We say things, we besmirch characters, and you know what, I don't care what candidate you like in the congressional race that we just had, doesn't matter to me. I saw the most horrific claims made about each of the candidates, all of which I knew from personal experience were untrue. But that didn't stop anyone from leveling accusations, and you know what? It seemed the more horrifying and grandiose they were, the more they were believed. And I'll just share with you, I was getting I got a hairdresser. It's a very important step for a woman in her life to get a hairdresser she trusts. And I found one right here in Longview, which was exciting. She said to me, I heard Jamie Herrera Butler wants to have forced vax of everything. And I said, really? You heard that? That's kind of interesting, because Jamie wrote a letter to our governor that said, you must provide vaccinations for people who want them. You mustn't force people to get vaxxed. And she looked at me and she said, what? She said, no, I saw this on Facebook. Yeah, that is where I got it. And so I was like, wait a minute, really? But I saw it with every single, there were items about every single candidate that were just patently untrue. And so for me, I'm just, and I know you're going to find this really hard to believe, but people have said untrue things about me too. And they also said untrue things about Dean. I think there's this idea that somehow elected officials are on a pedestal, and I would like to dissuade you of that notion. We should be available to any of our constituency who need us, who want to ask us questions. If we are not available, we do not deserve to be reelected. It's just as simple as that. And so my encouragement to anyone who will listen is, if you hear something that sounds like a little, that's kind of crazy, reach out to me and ask me. But I would say that about any of your elected officials, that it's super important to have the engaged discussion so that a little piece of something that happened isn't taken out of context and then made the full story. And I could give you about 1,000 examples, and I'm pretty sure Dean could too. But it's really important to know when a vote was taken, why was it taken, what was the reason for the vote? Did you get something more? How did you change the bill? Did you make the bill better? And therefore you had to vote for it because you made it better? What happened there? Those are the pieces of context that are missing from the debate that we're having today.
Yeah. One of the things we were sent some questions or just issues to think about ahead of time. And one of the topics raised was, how do you think politics has changed over our lifetimes that we've been involved individually in politics? And so I've been involved, I would say, for about 35 years now in both kind of legislative politics, so Congress, state legislatures, and then elections, just getting people elected, trying to unelect other people. And thinking back over those decades and how things have changed, I think one of the things that's changed is that there used to be a lot more friendships. There used to be a lot more collegiality across the aisle, even people who are on different sides. You know, I'm thinking of, you know, people like Tip O'Neill or Tom Foley or Bob Dole, you know, on both sides, people who could play and work well with others, right? Who could get along, do some of the stuff we were talking about earlier about being respectful, having active listening, and just being able to disagree and then go out at the end of the day after a long day on the House or the Senate floor, and you go out to the local bar on Capitol Hill and you sit down and you have a drink or two and you visit and you get to know each other. So there were these bonds, there was this friendship. And I'm from Ohio, originally from Columbus, and so may not surprise you to find out that I'm a huge Ohio State fan. And of course, there was the legendary coach Woody Hayes. And Woody Hayes and I probably didn't share very much in common politically. You know, he was very pro-Vietnam War, but he wrote a book called You Win with People. And I think the basic philosophy of that remains true today. And just one personal example I'll give of this idea of having friendships across the aisle. So when I was working for the Sierra Club up in Alaska, I was assigned down in DC for a while, working on an issue that had to do with the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in the very northeastern corner of Alaska, our biggest wildlife refuge, whether or not it was going to be drilled for oil and gas. Sierra Club, of course, was opposed to it. Others in Congress, oil companies, were in support of it. At the time, there was a local congressman from Columbus named John Kasich. Some of you may have heard of him. He then also ran for president. And so one night after work, I go into a bar, and it's appropriately named, as it reinforces the point I'm making, the Hawk and Dove on Capitol Hill. It's a legendary bar for political types, the Hawk and the Dove. And I was going there to watch Ohio State basketball team play in the NIT final championship. Lo and behold, John Kasich was there. Said I'd met him once before, actually, in the governor's mansion when he was first congressman. So I went up, reintroduced myself, and we had a wonderful, enjoyable evening watching Ohio State win the NIT tournament. But that's just making the point of having friendships, cultivating those friendships, proactively doing that. Another thing Dean said to me as he walked in tonight, he said, well, we missed you last night at Drinking Liberally, which is a monthly meeting of so-called progressives. And Dean said then, well, I don't know why they're letting me in. But I actually just throwing this out as kind of lighthearted thing, but it might not be a bad idea. What about a drinking moderately? That pulls together people from the right and the left, Democrats and Republicans, and we get a drinking moderately going.
Okay, if there's one thing to come away with tonight, Drinking moderately. We'll go with that.
You know, I actually forgot what the original question was. I was
That's
so
okay. That's
But,
good.
you know, he talked about how there's not that collegiateness going on in that there used to be, and in my 16 years in the House and the Senate, I could see it changing somewhat. But another change, and I was thinking about that, what has changed, and one thing that really changed, and Andre might be kind of interested in this, is when I first got there in the 2005 session, there was a table up at the front for the press, and they were fighting over seats. Now the table sits vacant unless there's some hot issue. Then they, you know, will come down, the reporters, and maybe a camera from King or Cairo shows up, but it's just not the way it was as far as getting the news out. There just isn't. Well, they used to have a building, the White House, where the press, yeah, that's where all the press hung out, was at the White House. It's gone. So it just kind of gives you a feeling of how things have changed. What I'll call the legitimate press is just not what it used to be. And what has replaced it? The thing we've talked so much about, social media and the internet. So things have changed considerably just in the last 15, 20 years.
I think also COVID was a huge problem. We, it's Senate and House, we have on Valentine's Day this thing called the Odd Couples Dinner. And you have to find someone from the other party and get them to be your date for this dinner. And then you go and you don't even talk even a little bit politics. You just get to know the human being that you have asked to be your date. And it's actually super enlightening, because what you come to know is that you care about the same things, you just have a different approach to getting to whatever the solution or the thing is. But I will tell you this. So Dean has been my friend for many, many years. I voted for Dean when I lived in Clark County.
I think I babysat her.
So we were on a transportation tour over in Eastern Washington. And I don't know if you know this about Dean, but he's a walker. He loves to walk, and so do I. And so we wrapped up dinner and everybody was sitting around, I'm sure drinking moderately. And I said to Dean, hey, you want to walk back? And it was probably what, 5 miles or so. And we walked all the way back, and in the span of that walk covered so many things. Topics that were from kids to trips to, I mean, just everything, whatever popped into our brains. And I share this with you because I think that is what led to such a successful working relationship between Dean and I. There were many things we could not come to agreement on, but there were many things we were able to, we trusted one another. Well, I felt warmly towards Dean. I think I won't speak for him, but I think that that's something that's also missing. It's this, the motives. Why does somebody think something, you know, why do they think that way? It's because they're bad. No, you don't know what their life experiences are and what happened. And so taking that time to communicate on that sort of a more personal level and to really peel back the onion layer, sort of like in the long letters, I think is a really valuable experience. In Clark County, Mike Gaston was our Republican chair for many, many years, mostly because you could fit all the Republicans in Clark County in a phone booth. And so he didn't have anybody to vote against him. But he was very dear friends with our Democrat chair of the Democrat Party in town, who had at that time all the power, all the people, all the, you know, and they were very good friends, and they would organize baseball games for charity, and they would do all these really terrific things together. So we've gotten away from the idea that our opponents are human too. And we've gotten away from the idea that while we may not agree with them on everything, we can still find something to stand shoulder to shoulder on. And so I share this with you because I want you to understand that in Olympia, prior to COVID, relationships were everything. Then when we were all separated and no one did anything together anymore, then it was just Katie bar the door, the gloves came off, there were no relationships formed. And last year, Republicans were not at only one negotiating table, and that was the capital budget, because they needed a 60% super vote. Otherwise, we were at none of the tables. Now, this isn't meant as a partisan dig, but when you don't even have a relationship enough with someone to say, dude, why are we not at the table? And get an honest answer, that's problematic. So for me, it's really exciting that we're going to be back in person, and some of those relationship, the breaking of the bread and the drinking of the mead, as it were, as George Washington would say, was very important, will be happening. And maybe we can sort of right the ship a little bit.
I guess let me follow up on that. Do you think that that's what's going to happen when everybody's back in person? Are the institutions strong enough that we'll go back to that, or is it going to continue to be everybody sits in their office and doesn't talk to each other?
I think it will return to that. I think it will return to that.
Look like you're going to say something.
No.
I want to cut you off. Okay. What can we do to improve the conversation? We've talked a lot about the reasons why it's so bad. You've talked about one thing for elected officials and just the relationships again. What else I'll ask you to, what else can elected officials do to improve the conversation?
I think elected officials must remain available. I think town halls are great because everybody gets to hear the same thing at the same time, but there has to be an honest desire. And here's another thing that's happening. This happened with a very close colleague of mine, where they were doing a town hall and someone of the same party rallied a whole bunch of people to come and heckle them and catcall them and, tell them they weren't really Republicans and that kind of thing. Those individuals need to be pushed to the side by those who would see themselves as being more civil. And I think just we have to stop giving energy to that, stop feeding the bear, as it were, and stop making it okay and acceptable. I mean, and call it out. So full disclosure, I got in a little hot water with my own party because they appointed someone who was a convicted sexual predator to a position of leadership. And I called it out and I said, you got to fix this. And they said, yeah, whatever, go away. And I said, if you don't, I'm going to go to the media. I'll have no choice but to shine a light on what you're doing, which resulted in a pretty hefty primary opponent for me. But it was the right thing to do. And I think so often elected officials are punished so easily that they're afraid to do the right thing. I just think you always have to do the right thing. And then, the chips will fall where they fall, but at least you'll be able to have a good look at yourself in the mirror.
Along those lines, I just want to publicly state that I really admire the stand that Jamie Herrera Butler took, the vote that she cast, and I'm very sorry that she lost the primary in the way that she did. And I think it's sad. And I think it's actually evidence of some of the problem we're talking about here, some of the polarization. I don't think it's a good development that she did not wind up in the top two. I think it's bad. And I got to say, and I speak for myself, but I can also, speak being the vice chair of the Cowles County Democratic Party and talking with a lot of other Democrats. I can tell you that there were a number of people who were seriously considering voting for her in the primary to make sure that this didn't happen. Now, I'm not going to tell you how I voted or how some of those other people might have voted in the end, but I will tell you that there was some hard thinking and some true deliberation that went into some Democrats' votes in that race. So, you know, I think to have go back again to having accountability within our own camps, within our own tribes, within our own parties, and you not being an elected official, but you asked the question, what can elected officials do to maybe make things better in the next session, to help with this issue of polarization overall? Model good behavior, right? Model the behavior we want to see from other elected officials and from citizens. I've been known to attend a few city council meetings here in Longview, and there was a time when I felt a city council member behaved very inappropriately to another person who was testifying, and just was completely was not treating them civilly. And so I was very public about that, and I felt this person needed to be held accountable. This person needed to be called out. And I said, you need to set a better example. You are a leader. You're an elected official. You need to set a better example. And there was a letter to the editor. And at the next city council meeting, the person apologized to me and said, you were right. I'm sorry. So I think politicians need to hold themselves accountable. We all need to hold ourselves accountable. But I think particularly within our own camps, we really need to work at that.
Well, the first thing I wanted to say is how we get out of this is everybody turn off your social media. But I would agree with the two of them that, you know, walk the walk, don't just talk the talk. And, you know, I think about my mother a lot. She's passed away years ago, and I think about her a lot, and I try to live the way I would and do the things that my mother would want me to do. And if you just do that, maybe you're probably going to do the right thing. It's kind of a Pollyanna thing, but I'm sorry.
Okay, we've got two people in leadership in the local parties. There's that old political song about all politics is local. What, you know, on a local level, what can you guys do? What can the people who are really engaged in, whether you call it party politics or partisan politics, what can you do to do what we all seem to want, which is ameliorate the name calling a bit?
Well, it's interesting. Again, this is from my perspective, and similar to Jim's working with local electorate and the folks that are active in politics. You know, labels tend to do us a disservice, but yeah, they're so convenient to use. I don't know if any of you identify as a wacko left-wing radical or a conservative right-wing extremist. I know a Nazi is kind of supposed to be a derogatory term. I don't know if it's somebody that blindly follows orders or if it's somebody that blatantly disregards the rights of others. I don't know. I believe, and I'm not sure, but I think to call someone a Christian nationalist is supposed to make them feel bad. But if that's a religious patriot, I would be happy being called that. We tend to use labels, and there's a time and a place to use labels. Let me just share a quick, you know, NASA developed a position called the capsule communicator. That's the person that talks to the astronauts in the space capsule. And they recognize for communication purposes, to have effective communication, there's got to be one voice to the capsule, and then have the capsule talk to Capcom. But they didn't use anybody to be the Capcom. They used an astronaut that trained with the fellow astronauts that are up in space, because they shared similarity of experiences and operational knowledge and slang. They could communicate using these labels and terms that nobody but them would understand. So when I'm with my wife and I call somebody an idiot, she knows what I mean. But if I tell that person they're an idiot to their face, they have no clue. And so labels do us a disservice. And so I guess, and again, even being you know, hearing, you know, the Republicans are on one side, the Democrats on the other, But if you hear us talk, there's so much that we share in common. So being labeled a Democrat on the national stage or a Republican on the national stage doesn't really fit us. And so even the most simplest labels sometimes just don't work. So that's something I found. And I try to discourage people from using labels in their communication. Define your terms.
I think I heard you use the word Christian nationalist. Well, when I hear the word Christian nationalist, the thing that comes to my mind are people like the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers. You know, they wave their cross and they wave their flag, yet I have a hard time understanding whether they really do believe in that when I see that the basic message that they have is misogyny, homophobic, you know, and I'm sorry I'm doing this, but you know, Christian nationalism just brings a bell in me that it just is a negative, because I see the rallies and I see these people there and I know what they stand for when they march down the street with their Nazi flags and their Confederate flags. So I'm sorry to have to bring this up, but that's my point of view when I hear that terms like that.
Ann just mentioned something. She leaned over and said, he just proved your point. That term Christian nationalist, Dean sees it totally different than I see it. And neither of us are describing the same person. And so that's fascinating that maybe we should set aside terms and labels because they don't always effectively communicate.
But it's a lot easier to use shorthand and call everybody on the left Marxists and everybody on the right Nazis. How do you try and end that?
I think Jim hit the nail on the head when he said you have to model the very best behavior, which, by the way, does not mean that I am perfect at all and I fall short way too much. But I do think that modeling the kind of behavior that you want to see is the most important thing that we can do. But also say, you know, one of my favorite things to do when someone starts to make comments or whatever, I'll say, how do you know that? Where, why, how? Ask questions and really get them to examine what they're thinking. And when you do that, it gives you understanding of where they're coming from, but also it helps them to think about where they're at and how they got there and whether it just helps them to reevaluate their position and what they're thinking, like I did with my fabulous hairdresser.
I liked what Senator Rivers said earlier when she was talking about motives, and that in discussion or debate about an issue, too many times people are assuming what someone's motive is instead of asking the simple question, like you said, why? How did you get to that position? Yeah, it's something I've certainly been guilty of at times. I think taking that additional step to, I'm really puzzled by that position. It's so different than my position, but to make an assumption, oh, they must have this position because A, B, or C, instead of asking them directly. And of course, it's hard to do if you aren't in relationships. And that's why, again, I go back to the older style of having friendships across the aisle, more cross-pollination between conservatives and liberals or Democrats and Republicans. I was kind of joking, but this idea of a drinking moderately or even, you know, like some kind of service project in town that the two county organizations get together and do together, just so we get to know folks personally that are active in politics on the Republican side or the Democratic side. So I go back again to these small steps. Doesn't sound like very impressive. It's not a magic bullet, right? Silver bullet, but it's something that people can do. And I think trying to reach out and establish some personal relationships and to take that, it's a risk in a way, right? To reach out and to propose this, you risk rejection or not going well or whatever. So it's taking a little bit of a risk, but I think being willing to do that and reach out and try and make some more connections in the community.
I think we got time for one more here, so I want to wind up with this. The four of you are and have been very involved in the local political dialogue. Is it going to get better? Are you optimistic about that? Pessimistic? What do you think? Ooh, a tough one.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 6.
Six that you think it'll get better? Boy, I sure hope so. I like to be on the positive side because the consequences are really pretty dire if it stays this way or it gets worse. We are just not in a good place right now. And I think you were mentioning at the beginning some of the public polling that you were citing. Just, what was it, 70% of the people across the country saying the country is far too polarized and they view it as a crisis. That's a pretty strong, I think people, if you pay attention to polling, to have 70% of the people agree on anything is pretty darn hard to do, right? I mean, you get 70% in an election, that's a blowout landslide, rarely happens. But so to get 70% of the people to agree on anything, and if 70% of the people are saying polarization is not only an issue, but it's a crisis, it seems like we have no choice if we really want to keep going with this democratic experiment in our republic in the United States, that we kind of have to pull ourselves together and we have to fix this. And I also think, you know, it's important to remember sometimes, you know, folks may have a more libertarian philosophy in their politics, or some folks are states' rights people and believe, you know, that the states should each have their say on certain issues and be able to exert more influence. And while I understand that to an extent, you go too far down that path, what you wind up with is almost separate little countries instead of states. We'll look at the issue of choice right now with Roe versus Wade overturned. We're actually seeing that happen right now across the country. We're going to have very different laws and very different situations for women and girls in 50 different states. Each state may have its own very different set of rules and regulations about how that issue is dealt with. And so our founders, there was a reason it's called the United States of America. It's not called the loosely affiliated states of America. It's not called the Association of States of America. United. So people sometimes quote the Federalist Papers and all this, and I firmly believe that the founders wanted us to be united as 50 states. Thank you.
So my personal, in my personal life, I try to be relentlessly and aggressively positive. Today, I guess I'd have to join Dean with 6 because it's better than 5, but only just. I am very hopeful that things will look up for us, but I think that the change starts here in this room and with the associations that we have with our families, with our close associations. And you guys, you know, it's not easy to stand up and say, enough. This is not moving the ball forward. Not an easy thing to do. It's a courageous thing, and courageous things can be really difficult, and you may have a fear of loss if you do it. But that's what it's going to take, enough people to stand up and say, enough.
Just a quick story. When I was a young person, my mother found me in a very compromised position. I was on a stool in the kitchen with my hand in the cookie jar. She asked me a simple question: did you take a cookie? I considered her question and answered it, no. Well, that day there was 2 lessons learned. Number 1, this is a lesson I taught my mom: words have meaning. I didn't take a cookie out of the cookie jar. I took 2 cookies out of the cookie jar. The second lesson she taught me: words come with intent. So as I thought about that, and punishment sometimes, I guess I should add, as I thought about that, as presenters or speakers or whatnot, let us speak precisely, because words have meaning. And as listeners, I think Jim mentioned this, let us not assume an intent, let's discover intent. And I think just those couple of things will help us in our dialogue.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for sharing. There we go. That's good. I'm going to turn back to Alex for some thoughts on what we've heard and some major points. So Alex, I will turn it over to you.
Absolutely. It's a big responsibility. First thing I want to say, I'm absolutely blown away by our amazing panel for a really great spirited discussion. And all of you, honestly, we had no way of estimating how many people would show up for a conversation like this. It's the first one we've done. There have not been a lot of in-person events happening at Lower Columbia College outside of a handful of hybrid classes. And so one of the errors we made was we did not print enough surveys because we didn't anticipate that this many people would be here. So for those of you who have a paper copy of a survey, please fill it out if you haven't already. If you're planning on filling it out online and not the physical copy, maybe pass it to someone else who would prefer to fill one out in person. And for those people here who didn't get one, or those people watching on the Zoom, please head to our website, civil-dialogue, DAILOG.com. Sure, Brandon, if you're still here and working the PowerPoint, we'd love to see the last slide. Thank you, Brandon. So yes, please. I mean, thank you again for all coming here. It was really thrilling to have this audience to talk about these really important issues. And if you have the opportunity, please do fill out one of these surveys. We want to learn more about who's here and what you're getting out of this. And this is the first of a 5-part series, so we would love to know how we can make them even better for the coming weeks. Thanks.
Okay. Well, you took most of what I was going to say. One thing that really struck me in the course of this, because I didn't know how this was going to go, and one of the points obviously of agreement was that I heard was this notion that with tailored news feeds, our own group and our Twitter or whatever, we all get to hear just what we agree with. We don't have to listen to anything else. Versus critical thinking that really needs to be taught in the schools. Today, when I looked at the internet, I saw a whole bunch of things about book banning and issue banning and subject banning in a lot of our schools. And it just, what I heard tonight in combination with what I saw today just scares the heck out of me. Our next forum is going to be on Thursday, September 2. We're going to be discussing the tension between jobs and local economic development, safeguarding our environment. We hope you will attend. If you can't attend, we hope you'll watch. As was said, we welcome, encourage, want your feedback. If you didn't get a form tonight, or if you're watching this, please go to the website. This show is going to be shown again on KLTV channel 29, starting the 20th through the 25th. And if you look at KLTV's website or at the Civil Dialogue website, you can see the exact times for that. So round one of the experiment, thank you all for being here. Thank you for caring about your community, and good night.